It was nearly 6 o'clock, but only gray, imperfect, misty dawn when we drew nigh the wharf. "There's some sailors running ahead there, if I see right," said I to Queequeg. "It can't be shadows. She's off by sunrise, I guess. Come on."
"Avast!"
cried a voice whose owner at the same time coming close behind us laid a hand upon both of our shoulders, and then, insinuating himself between us, stood stooping forward a little in the uncertain twilight, strangely peering from Queequeg to me. It was Elijah.
"Going aboard?"
"Hands off, will you?" said I.
"Looky here,"
said Queequeg, shaking himself.
"Go away. Ain't going aboard, then?"
"Yes, we are," said I. "But what business is that of yours? Do you know, Mr. Elijah, that I consider you a little impertinent?"
No, I wasn't aware of that,"
said Elijah, slowly and wonderingly, looking from me to Queequeg with the most unaccountable glances. "Elijah," said I, "you will oblige my friend and I by withdrawing. We are going to the Indian and Pacific Oceans and would prefer not to be denied."
"Ye be. Coming back afore breakfast?"
"He's cracked, Queequeg," said I. "Come on."
"Holla!"
cried stationary Elijah, hailing us when we had removed a few paces. "Never mind him," said I. "Queequeg, come on." But he stole up to us again, and suddenly, clapping his hand on my shoulder, said,
"Did you see anything looking like men going toward that ship a while ago?"
Struck by this plain, matter-of-fact question, I answered, saying, "Yes, I thought I did see 4 or 5 men, but it was too dim to be sure."
Very dim, said Elijah. "Morning to ye."
Once more we quitted him, but once more he came softly after us, and touching my shoulder again, said,
"See if you can find 'em now, will ye?"
"Find who?"
Morning to ye,"
he rejoined, again moving off.
"Oh, I was gonna warn ye against, but never mind. It's all one, all in the family too. Sharp frost this morning, ain't it? Goodbye to ye. Shan't see ye again very soon, I guess, unless it's before the grand jury."
And with these cracked words he finally departed, leaving me, for the moment, in no small wonderment to his frantic impudence. At last, stepping on board the Pequod, we found everything in profound quiet, not a soul moving. The cabin entrance was locked within, the hatches were all on, and lumbered with coals of rigging. Going forward to the forecastle, we found the slide of the scuttle open. Seeing a light, we went down, and found only one old rigger there, wrapped in a tattered pea jacket. He was thrown at whole length upon 2 chests, his face downwards and enclosed in his folded arms. The profoundest slumber slept upon him. "Those sailors we saw, Queequeg, where can they have gone to?" said I, looking dubiously at the sleeper. But it seemed that, when on the wharf, Queequeg had not at all noticed what I now alluded to. Hence I would have thought myself to have been optically deceived in that matter, were it not for Elijah's otherwise inexplicable question. But I beat the thing down, and again, marking the sleeper, jocularly hinted to Queequeg that perhaps we'd better sit up with the body, telling him to establish himself accordingly. He put his hand upon the sleeper's rear, as though feeling if it was soft enough, and then, without much ado, sat quietly down there. "Gracious, Queequeg, don't sit there," said I.
"Oh, pretty good seat," said Queequeg. "My country way won't hurt him face."
"Face?" said I. "Call that his face? Very benevolent countenance, then, but how hard he breathes. He's heaving himself. Get off, Queequeg, you're heavy. It's grinding the face of this poor man. Get off, Queequeg. Look, he'll twitch you off soon enough. I wonder he don't wake." Queequeg removed himself to just beyond the head of the sleeper and lighted his tomahawk pipe. I sat at his feet. We kept the pipe passing over the sleeper from one to the other. Meanwhile, upon questioning him in his broken fashion, Queequeg gave me to understand that in his land, owing to the absence of settees and sofas of all sorts, the kings, chiefs, and great people generally were in the custom of fattening some of the lower orders of ottomans, and to furnish a house comfortably in that respect, you had only to buy about 8 or 10 lazy fellows and lay them round in the piers and alcoves. Besides, it is very convenient on an excursion, and much better than those garden chairs which are convertible into walking sticks upon occasion, a chief calling his attendant and desiring him to make a settee of himself under a spreading tree, perhaps in some damp, marshy place. While narrating these things, every time Queequeg received the tomahawk from me, he flourished the hatchet side of it over the sleeper's head. What's that for, Queequeg?
Very easy, Killy. Oh, very easy.
He was going on with some wild reminiscence about his tomahawk pipe, which, it seemed, had in its two uses both brained his foes and soothed his soul, when we were directly attracted to the sleeping rigger. The strong vapor now completely filling the contracted hole, it began to tell upon him. He breathed with a sort of muffledness, then seemed troubled in the nose, then revolved over once or twice, then sat up and rubbed his eyes.
Hello,
he breathed at last.
Who be ye smokers?
Shipped men, answered I. When does she sail?
Aye, you're going on her, be ye. She sails today. The captain came aboard last night.
What captain? Ahab?
Who but him indeed?
I was going to ask him some further questions concerning Ahab when we heard a noise on deck.
Hola, Starbuck's sister, said the rigger. He's a lively shipmate, that. Good man and a pious, but all alive now I must turn to.
And so saying, he went on deck, and we followed. It was now clear sunrise. Soon the crew came aboard in twos and threes, the riggers bestirred themselves, the mates were actively engaged, and several of the shore people were busy in bringing various last things on board. Meanwhile, Captain Ahab remained invisibly enshrined within his cabin. At length, towards noon, upon the final dismal of the ship's riggers, and after the Pequod had been hauled out from the wharf, and after the ever-thoughtful Charity had come off in a whaleboat with her last gift, a nightcap for Stubb, the second mate, her brother-in-law, and a spare Bible for the steward, after all this, the two captains, Peleg and Bildad, issued from the cabin, and turning to the chief mate, Peleg said,
Now, Mr. Starbucks, are you sure everything's right? Captain Ahab is all ready, just spoke to him. Nothing more to be got from shore. Well, call all hands then. Muster 'em up after, blast 'em.
No need for profane words, however great the hurry, Peleg, said Bildad. But away with thee, friend Starbuck, and do our bidding. How now? Here, upon the very point of starting for the voyage, Captain Peleg and Captain Bildad were going it with a high hand on the quarterdeck, just as if they were to be joint commanders at sea, as well as to all appearances in port. And as for Captain Ahab, no sign of him was yet to be seen, only they said he was in the cabin. But then the idea was that his presence was by no means necessary in getting the ship under way and steering her well out to sea. Indeed, as that was not at all his proper business, but the pilot's, and he was not yet completely recovered, so they said. Therefore, Captain Ahab stayed below. And all this seemed natural enough, especially as in the merchant services many captains never show themselves on deck for a considerable time after heaving up the anchor, but remain over the cabin table, having a farewell merry-making with their shore friends before they quit the ship for good with the pilot. But there was not much chance to think over the matter, for Captain Peleg was now all alive. He seemed to do most of the talking and commanding, and not Bildad.
Aft here, ye sons of bachelors,
he cried as the sailors lingered on the mainmast.
Mr. Starbucks, drive 'em aft. Strike the tent there,
was the next order. As I hinted before, this whalebone marquee was never pitched except in the port, and on board the Pequod for 30 years the order to strike the tent was well known to be the next thing to heaving up the anchor.
Man the capstan, blood and thunder, jump,
was the next command, and the crew sprang for the handspikes. Now, in getting underway, the station generally occupied by the pilot is the forward part of the ship. And here Bildad, who, with Peleg, be it known in addition to his other officers, was one of the licensed pilots of the port, he being suspected to have got himself made a pilot in order to save the Nantucket pilot fee to all the ships he was concerned in, for he never piloted any other craft. Bildad, I say, might now be seen actively engaged in looking over the bows for the approaching anchor, and at intervals singing what seemed a dismal stave of psalmody to cheer the hands at the windlass, who roared forth some sort of chorus about the girls in Bobble Alley with hearty goodwill. Nevertheless, not 3 days previous, Bildad had told them that no profane songs would be allowed on board the Pequod, particularly in getting underway, and Charity, his sister, had placed a small choice copy of Watts in each seaman's berth. Meantime, overseeing the other part of the ship, Captain Peleg ripped and swore astern in the most frightful manner. I almost thought he would sink the ship before the anchor could be got up. Involuntarily, I paused on my handspike and told Queequeg to do the same, thinking of the perils we both ran in starting on the voyage with such a devil for a pilot. I was comforting myself, however, with the thought that in pious Bildad might be found some salvation, spite of his 777th lay, when I felt a sudden sharp poke in my rear, and turning round was horrified at the apparition of Captain Peleg in the act of withdrawing his leg from my immediate vicinity. That was my first kick.
"Is that the way they heave in the merchant service?"
he roared.
"Spring, thou sheephead! Spring and break thy backbone! Why don't you spring, I say, all of you, spring! Queequeg, spring, thou chap with the red whiskers! Spring, thou Scotch cap! Spring, thou green pants! Spring, I say, all of you, and spring your eyes out!"
And so saying, he moved along the windlass, here and there using his leg very freely, while imperturbable Bildad kept leading off with his psalmody. Thinks I, Captain Peleg must have been drinking something today. At last, the anchor was up, the sails were set, and off we glided. It was a short, cold Christmas, and as the short northern day merged into night, we found ourselves almost broad upon the wintry ocean, whose freezing spray cast us in ice as in polished armor. The long rows of teeth on the bulwarks glistened in the moonlight, and like the white ivory tusks of some huge elephant, vast, curving icicles deepened from the bows. Lank Bildad, as pilot, headed the first watch, and ever and anon as the old craft deep-dived into the green seas and sent the shivering frost all over her, and the winds howled and cordage rang, his steady notes were heard. "Sweet fields beyond the swelling flood stand dressed in living green. So to the Jews old Canaan stood, while Jordan rolled between." Never did these sweet words sound more sweetly to me than then. They were full of hope and fruition. Spite of this frigid winter night in the boisterous Atlantic, spite of my wet feet and wetter jacket, there was yet, it then seemed to me, many a pleasant haven in store, and meads and glades so eternally veneral that the grass shot up by the spring, untrodden, unwilted, remains at midsummer. At last, we gained such an offing that the two pilots were needed no longer. The stout sailboat that had accompanied us began ranging alongside. It was curious and not unpleasing how Peleg and Bildad were affected at this juncture, especially Captain Bildad. For loath to depart, yet very loath to leave for good a ship bound on so long and perilous a voyage, beyond both stormy capes, a ship in which some thousands of his hard-earned dollars were invested, a ship in which an old shipmate sailed as captain, a man almost as old as he, once more starting to encounter all the terrors of the pitless jaw, loath to say goodbye to a thing so every way brimful of every interest to him, poor old Bildad lingered long, passed the deck with anxious strides, ran down into the cabin to speak another farewell word there, again came on the deck and looked to windward, looked toward the wide and endless waters, only bounded by the far-off, unsea eastern continents, looked towards the land, looked aloft, looked right and left, looked everywhere and nowhere, and at last, mechanically coiling a rope upon its pin, convulsively grasped stout Peleg by the hand, and holding up a lantern, for a moment stood gazing heroically in his face, as much to say, "Nevertheless, friend Peleg, I can stand it. Yes, I can." As for Peleg himself, he took it more like a philosopher, but for all his philosophy, there was a tear twinkling in his eye when the lantern came too near, and he too did not a little run from cabin to deck, now a word below, and now a word with Starbuck, the chief mate. But at last he turned to his comrade with a final sort of look upon him.
"Captain Bildad, come, old shipmate me Wisco. Back to the main yard there. Boat, ahoy! Stand by to come alongside now. Careful, careful. Come, Bildad boy, say ye last. Luck to ye, Starbuck, luck to ye, Mr. Stubb. Luck to ye, Mr. Flask. Goodbye, and good luck to ye all. In these stay 3 years, I'll have a hot supper smoking for ye in Nantucket. Hurrah and away!
God bless ye, and have ye in his holy keeping, men,
murmured old Bildad almost incoherently.
I hope you'll have fine weather now, so that Captain Ahab may soon be moving among ye. A pleasant sun is all he needs, and you'll have plenty of them in the tropic voyage ye go. Be careful in the hunt, ye mates. Don't stave the boats needlessly, ye harpooners. Good white cedar plank is raised full 3% within the year. Don't forget your prayers either, Mr. Starbuck. Mind that Cooper don't waste the spare staves. Oh, the sail needles are in the green locker. Don't wail too much a Lord's Day, men, but don't miss a fair chance either. That's rejecting heaven's good gifts. Have an eye to the molasses tierce, Mr. Stubb. It's a little leaky, I thought. If ye touch at the islands, Mr. Flask, beware of fornication. Goodbye. Goodbye. Don't keep that cheese too long down in the hold, Mr. Starbuck. It'll spoil. Be careful with the butter. 20 cents the pound it was, and mind ye...
Come, Captain Bildad, stop plavering. Away!
And with that, Peleg hurried him over the side, and both dropped into the boat. Ship and boat diverged. The cold, damp night breeze blew between. A screaming gull flew overhead. The two hulls wildly rolled. We gave 3 heavy-hearted cheers and blindly plunged like fate into the lone Atlantic. Some chapters back, one Bulkington was spoken of. A tall, new-landed mariner encountered a New Bedford at the inn. When, on that shivering winter's night, the Pequod thrust her vindictive bows into the cold, malicious waves, who should I see standing at her helm but Bulkington? I looked with sympathetic awe and fearfulness upon the man who, in midwinter, just landed from a 4 years' dangerous voyage, could so unrestingly push off again for still another tempestuous term. The land seemed scorching to his feet. Wonderful as things are ever the unmentionable, deep memories yield no edifice. This 6-inch chapter is the stoneless grave of Bulkington. Let me only say that it fared with him as with the storm-tossed ship that miserable drives along the leeward land. The port would fain give succour. The port is pitiful. In the port is safety, comfort, hearthstone, supper, warm blankets, friends, all that's kind to our moralities. But in that gale, the port, the land, is that ship's direst jeopardy. She must fly all hospitality. One touch of land, though it but graze the keel, would make her shudder through and through. With all her might she crowds all sail offshore, in so doing fights against the very winds that fain would blow her homeward, seeks all the lashed sea's landlessness again, for refuge's sake, for lonely rushing into peril, her only friend, her bitterest foe. Know ye now Bulkington? Glimpses do ye seem to see of that mortality intolerable truth? That all deep, earnest thinking is but the intrepid effort of the soul to keep the open independence of her sea, while the wildest winds of heaven and earth conspire to cast her on the treacherous slavish shore. But, as in landlessness alone resides highest truth, shoreless, indefinite as God, so better it is to perish in that howling infinite than by ingloriously dashed upon the lee, even if that were safety. For worm-like, then, oh, who would craven crawl to land? Terrors of the terrible, is all this agony so vain? Take heart, O Bulkington, bear thee grimly demigod, up from the spray of thy oceans perishing, straight up leaps thy hypothesis. As Queequeg and I now fairly embarked in the business of whaling, and as this business of whaling has somehow come to be regarded among landsmen as rather unpoetical and disreputable pursuit, therefore I am all anxiety to convince ye landsmen, of the injustice hereby done to us hunters of whales. In the first place, it may be deemed almost superfluous to establish the fact that among people at large, the business of whaling is not accounted on a level with what are called the liberal professions. If a stranger were introduced into any miscellaneous metropolitan society, it would, by slightly advance the general opinion of his merits, were he presented to the company as a harpooner, say, and if emulation of the naval officers, he should append the initials SWF, sperm whale fishery, to his visiting card. Such a procedure would be deemed preeminently presuming and ridiculous. Doubtless, one leading reason why the world declines honoring us whalemen is this. They think that, at best, our vocation amounts to a butchering sort of business, and that when actively engaged therein, we are surrounded by all manner of defilements. Butchers we are, that is true, but butchers also, and butchers of the bloodiest badge, have been all martial commanders whom the world invariably delights to honor. And as for the matter of the alleged uncleanliness of our business, ye shall soon be initiated into certain facts hitherto pretty generally unknown, and which upon the whole will triumphantly plant the sperm whale ship at least among the cleanliest things of this tidy earth. But even granting the charge in question to be true, what disordered slippery decks of a whale ship are comparable to the unspeakable carrion of those battlefields from which so many soldiers return to drink in all ladies' platitudes? And if the idea of peril is so much enhances the popular conceit of the soldier's profession, let me assure ye that many a veteran who has freely marched up to a battery would quickly recoil at the apparition of the sperm whale's vast tail, fanning into eddies the air over his head. For what are the comprehensible terrors of man, compared with the interlinked terrors and wonders of God? But, though the world scouts at us, whale hunters, yet does it unwittingly pay us the profoundest homage, ye an all-abounding adoration, for almost all the tapers, lamps, and candles that burned round the globe, burn as before so many shrines to our glory. But look at this matter in other lights, weigh it in all sorts of scales, see what we whalemen are, and have been. Why did the Dutch in De Witt's time have admirals in their whaling fleets? Why did Louis XVI of France, at his own personal expense, fit out whaling ships from Dunkirk and politely invite to that town some score or two of families from our own island of Nantucket? Why did Britain, between the years of 1750 and 1788, pay to her whalemen in bounties upwards of £1 million? And lastly, how comes it that we whalemen of America now outnumber all the rest of the banded whalemen in the world, sail a navy of upwards of 700 vessels, manned by 18,000 men, yearly consuming $4 million, the ship's worth at the time of sailing $20 million, and every year importing into our harbors a well-reaped harvest of $7 million? How comes all this, if there be not something puissant in whaling? But this is not the half. Look again. I freely assert that the cosmopolitan philosopher cannot, for his life, point out one single peaceful influence which within the last 60 years has operated more potentially upon the whole broad world, taken in one aggregate, than the high and mighty business of whaling. One way and another, it has begotten events so remarkable in themselves and so continuously momentous in their sequential issues that whaling may well be regarded as that Egyptian mother who bore offspring themselves pregnant from her womb. It would be a hopeless, endless task to catalogue all these things. Let a handful suffice. For many years past, the whale ship has been the pioneer in ferreting out the remotest and least known places of the world. She has explored seas and archipelagos which had no chart, where no Cook nor Vancouver has ever sailed. If American and European men of war now peacefully ride in once savage harbors, let them fire salutes to the honor and glory of the whale ship, which originally showed them the way, and first interpreted between them and the savages. They may celebrate as they will the heroes of exploring expeditions, your Cooks, your Cruisterns, but I say that the scores of anonymous captains have sailed out of Nantucket that were great and greater than your Cook and your Cruisterns. So in this succorless empty-handedness, they, in the heathenish sharked waters and by the beaches of unrecorded javelin islands, battled with virgin wonders and terrors that Cook, with all his marines and muskets, would not willingly have dared. All that is made such a flourish of in the old South Sea voyages, those things were but the lifetime commonplace of our heroic Nantucketers. Often adventures which Vancouver dedicates 3 chapters to, these men accounted unworthy of being set down in ship's common log. Ah, the world, oh, the world. Until the whale fishery rounded Cape Horn, no commerce but colonial, scarcely any intercourse but colonial, was carried on between Europe and the long line of the opulent Spanish provinces on the Pacific coast. It was the whalemen who first broke through the jealous policy of the Spanish crown, touching those colonies, and, if space permitted, it might be distinctly shown how from those whalemen at last eventuated the liberation of Peru, Chile, and Bolivia from the yoke of old Spain and the establishment of the eternal democracy in those parts. That great America on the other side of the sphere, Australia, was given to the enlightened world by the whalemen. After its first blunder-born discovery by a Dutchman, all other ships long shunned those shores as pestiferously barbarous. But the whale ship touched there. The whale ship is the true mother of that now mighty colony. Moreover, in the infancy of the first Australian settlement, the emigrants were several times saved from starvation by the benevolent biscuit of the whale ship, luckily dropping an anchor in their waters. The uncounted isles of all Polynesia confess the same truth, and do commercial homage to the whale ship that cleared the way for the missionary and the merchant, and in many cases carried the primitive missionaries to their first destinations. If that double-bolted land Japan is ever to become hospitable, it is the whale ship alone to whom the credit will be due, for already she is on the threshold. But if, in the face of all this, you still declare that whaling has no aesthetically noble associations connected with it, then am I ready to shiver 50 lances with you there and unhorse you with a split helmet every time. The whale has no famous author and whaling no famous chronicler, you will say. The whale no famous author and whaling no famous chronicler. Who wrote the first account of our Leviathan? Who but mighty Job? And who composed the first narrative of the whaling voyage? Who but no less a prince than Alfred the Great, who with his own royal pen took down the words from Other, the Norwegian whale hunter of those times? And who pronounced our glowing eulogy in Parliament? Who but Edmund Burke? True enough, but then whalemen themselves are poor devils. They have no good blood in their veins. No good blood in their veins? They have something better than royal blood there. The grandmother of Benjamin Franklin was Mary Morrell, afterwards by marriage Mary Folger, one of the old settlers of Nantucket, and the ancestress to the long line of Folgers and harpooners, all kith and kin to noble Benjamin, this day darting the barbed iron from one side of the world to the other. Good again, but then I'll confess that somehow whaling is not respectable. Whaling not respectable? Whaling is imperial. By Old English statutory law, the whale is declared a royal fish. Oh, that's only nominal. The whale himself has never figured in any grand imposing way. The whale never figured in any grand imposing way. In one of the mighty triumphs given to a Roman general upon his entering the world's capital, the bones of a whale brought all the way from the Syrian coast were the most conspicuous object in the symboled procession. Granted, since you cite it, but sense what you will, there is no real dignity in whaling. No dignity in whaling. The dignity of our calling the very heavens attest. Cetus is a constellation in the south. No more. Drive down your hat in presence of the Tsar and take it off to Queequeg. No more. I know a man that in his lifetime has taken 350 whales. I account that man more honorable than that great captain of antiquity who boasted of taking as many walled towns. And as for me, if by any possibility there be any as yet undiscovered prime thing in me, if I shall ever deserve any real repute in that small but high-hushed world which I might not be unreasonably ambitious of, if hereafter I shall do anything that, upon the whole, a man might rather have done than to have left undone, if at my death my executors, or more properly my creditors, find any precious MSS in my desk, then here I prospectively ascribe all the honor and the glory to whaling, for a whale ship was my Yale College and my Harvard. In behalf of the dignity of whaling, I would fain advance not but substantiated facts. But after embattling his facts, an advocate who should wholly suppress a not unreasonable surmise, which might tell eloquently upon his case, such an advocate, would he not be blameworthy? It is well known that at the coronations of kings and queens, even modern ones, a certain curious process of seasoning them for their function is gone through. There is a salt cellar of state, so-called, and there may be a caster of state. How they use the salt precisely, who knows? Certain I am, however, that a king's head is solemnly oiled at his coronation, even as the head of a salad. Can it be, though, that they anoint it with the view of making its interior run well, as if they anoint machinery? Much might be ruminated here concerning the essential dignity of this regal process, because in common life we esteem but meanly and contemptibly a fellow who anoints his hair and pallidly smells of the anointing. In truth, a mature man who uses hair oil, unless medicinally, that man has probably got a quaggy spot in him somewhere. As a general rule, he cannot amount to much in his totality. But the only thing to be considered here is this. What kind of oil is used at coronations? Certainly it cannot be olive oil, no Macassar oil, nor castor oil, nor bear's oil, nor train oil, nor cod liver oil. What then can it possibly be but sperm oil in its unmanufactured, unpolluted state, the sweetest of all oils? Think of that, ye loyal Britons. We whalemen supply your kings and queens with coronation stuff.